So we see life as it really isn't what it is. Because our conception is based on all the things we learned, the society told us, especially with the food, all the corporations, the advertisements was inundated that this is our answer and our redemption, and they play the songs and everything when you see the commercials on TV all about the food and what it does for you. So the only way out is that change of thinking, perception change. And the reason I always emphasize on this, and the reason why in the doctor's opinion he reverts to this, because they tried everything. And it goes to the fact that all of these diets and everything we try to no avail, like 99% of diets fail. And people who, 1 or 2% who stay on it are miserable. And when I did it for a year, a lot of times it's temporary because I didn't have the perception change. So how does this all work? So, and I always bring up the water as a perfect example of this. And I also have some fruit here, and I eat a lot of vegetables, but the perception changes. This is my savior here, right? God's gift to us, not with the corporations and you go buy these drinks with 1,000 calories in them, that we're taught that that's the answer, that's the solution. That's not the solution. It's here in this water that I have here. So the whole key, the whole situation is this. Slowly but surely, you have the change in perception, the spiritual awakening. Sometimes they call it the educational variety. So even when you're eating all those other foods, if you start to say to yourself, I don't want all of these, or what the corporations put in and what they change your taste buds and get the chemicals that go in your brain, all of these, what they call processed foods, have all of these things that scientists and psychologists sit down all day and figure out. But slowly but surely, you can turn, think of it like a barge, and turning it around. But every day, have a perception change. And here's a perfect example. Or even the delicious fruit that I eat, or the vegetables, rather than having that synthetic stuff and all that garbage. And also, you want the body. How about the perception change? Your body's God's temple, and think of the leanness and healthy feelings. I also want to mention that the compulsions with food could go to anorexia and all these other things, bulimia, but basically it's the same thing, having the perception change. Because we're like imprisoned by the self and the ego. The ego takes on all of these things. It says, I got a great idea. I'll eat all this food. Or I'll be like the movie stars, look like them, or I'll be rich and wealthy, or all these material things that bring us what's called momentary pleasure, but on the other side of momentary pleasure is just as much pain. So when you eat that big plate of food, or you go around becoming successful, trying to get people to like you and all of these things in life, and then you find one person who does and you're devastated. So we put our faith in something not of what they call the things of the flesh, things of like gluttony, right? And all of these things. That jealousy and envy comes in when we want to do well. When we say, I have to have more self-esteem, it's interesting. This whole program is so counterintuitive. What I mean by that is that I felt I had to build myself up, maybe dress better, look better, have more education, or be able to travel or something and come back and say to people all of these experiences I had. And sometimes I go to people, these experts, and they say, listen, you got to get more things in your life so you'll have more things to talk about. All of these things on the outside, trying to improve myself. But no matter what I did, there was always somebody better. And so my joy and happiness was dependent on this craziness in my mind. We're creating God's image. So with the food and everything in our lives, the joy is within us. So be happy and joyful, because that's where you're going to find it. And we have that. And that's what this whole program is about, in the steps. I don't have to go out and conquer the world. We could conquer the whole world, but if we don't conquer our mind and have control over that and be able to have positive thinking. But what's interesting? People always say, well, I'm trying to think positive. But sometimes I think negative, but I know it's not true. When I have anger and fear and these emotions, they're really not true. The truth is the happiness and joy, because the anger and emotions come from a false self, the ego. When we have humility and it's not about us, then we have God's gift. It's in there all the time. But we bury what's called, and people familiar with the steps, the 12-step programs, these defects of character. Eating the food's a defect of character. It's called gluttony, right? One of the 7 deadly sins. So we become lustful and gluttonous because we think that's where we're going to find the answer. So at our day, we make that our higher power. But there's a way, again. The whole reason for this meeting, what I wanted to say was, there's a way out of this mess, and I only say one way. Many times, even in we agnostics, it says there, if a better philosophy and morals of life could have saved us, we would have recovered long ago. The thing is, there's only one solution, but the solution is within here. It's not in all of these diet programs and getting all this food sent to us. What kind of these crazy things? Trying to control it. It's getting centered like anything in life. We have an answer. We call it being in a solution. The problem is our obsession with the food. The solution is to replace that with the joy that we expect to get from food, from people, from money, from success, which never is enough. It never fills us up. Why are billionaires unhappy and want to kill themselves? Or they see another person with $2 billion. It's just never ending, because once we get there, and I haven't mentioned this in a long time, so I will now. The man who climbed Mount Everest, he spent his whole life trying to get all the money and get himself in shape to climb Mount Everest. On the way up there, he got frostbite, maimed his body and everything. When he got up there, he had what's called momentary pleasure. He was happy for a moment. When he came home and he started to see, when he looked on the internet, that some people climbed it 10 times and other people, there were 7 other peaks in the world. So he lost all of that. The joy wasn't there. And the place I actually heard this story was at a meditation center. And the guy who said it, he says, I could sit on my couch right here, right now, and be just as happy. He says, I could be just as happy here. But not only that, the happiness isn't momentary. It's completely. If you like the video and want to spread the message, press the like and subscribe button. Thank you. Just like if you go on that new diet, this is the answer, and you feel great for the first few days. But when we work this program through our heart and these steps, it's incredibly more wonderful, because we keep on changing our thinking. So one day I have a change of thought towards the drinks I drink, and I'm drinking this healthy drink, right? And then the next day I think about it a little bit more. Maybe I'll go back to my old ways, but the mind is changing. Then I start thinking, do I really want that? Then all of a sudden we have with the spiritual awakening towards the food, and this is what we call healthy. Not some pastries or things you get, full of that, laden with that synthetic sugars and all the refined sugars and processed stuff to keep it preserved. And they actually have chemicals that they know, and the scientists know, they put in there that actually influence the hypothalamus and release endorphins. What do you think it's all about? It's all about making the money. So if they could put something in there, all the chemicals and scientists that will stimulate your brain, they're going to do it. So as far as a diet, and I say I'm on a whole food plant-based diet. Look, and I always say this, it doesn't matter what you're on. The problem is what we put on the foods. You ever go in a restaurant and it's called the SOS, salt, oil, and sugar. It's always, and again, going back to a salad is really a pound of lettuce. Look on the package, it's 100 calories. By the time they're done with, go in these restaurants and look on the menu, they place the calories, it's 1,200 calories by the time that, sometimes these dressings could be 300 or 400 calories alone, and everything else they put on there. But the main thing is, and the whole thing about this is that, you might say, well, I want all of that. When you have that perception change and you eat healthy foods, you wouldn't want to put that garbage in your body, because all of a sudden you'll realize in your mind you have the perception change. You'll think of it. And again, the perception change, the design for living, is the only way out. You could try to control it, but that day's going to come, and it's like all these diets fail, Dieting is easy. I've been on 1,000 of them, right? So it just goes on and on, because the perception hasn't been changed. And again, I did it for a year, very strict diet called the Gray Sheet Diet in this program. In the program is Overeaters Anonymous, but the problem was that I didn't change my thinking. I was miserable every day. I couldn't wait till I had the next meal, you eat 3 meals a day, right? I heard a joke about that. The guy says, I'm on this program, it's 3 meals a day. He says, I have my last meal by 9 a.m. in the morning. So, all of this craziness. But when we have the perception change, whatever it is, and, some carbohydrates and stuff, people say, well, I'll take an example, potato. They say, well, that's a bad diet food. No, it fills your stomach up. And if it's what we put on it, right? I don't know if you remember years ago, they had what they call these potato shops, and you go in there and they put everything on it, sour cream and all this bacon bits, I don't know, a million things, cheese, and so it was thousands of calories in these meals, but for its size, it fills you up. So, and again, the reason I bring it up is because these corporations, you pay a lot of money to, $1 billion diet corporations send you little morsels of food with the same poison, high caloric. So you're eating a little dessert about this big, and it's poisonous, and it's causing all the problems. Also, it's refined, processed with all the chemicals and craziness in it. So we have a way out. The way out of this is there's only one way out of this mess, which I did as the topic, and Bill found it. It's that belief change, and on 25 in the big book it tells us about spiritual awakening, and there's a solution. It says, the great fact is just this, and nothing less, that we've had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude towards life, and our fellows, and towards God's universe, towards our addiction with food, towards our addiction to people. I always throw everything in there because the perception comes when it's not about the self, the ego, which creates all these problems. The ego is with the food, and then we become very finite, like with the food, we isolate, and it becomes a higher power, or people do, and it's all about pleasing people. But we're like in a prison in this life. And also when I went to that same meditation center, the guy says, you could walk out of this prison right now. And I heard somebody in before in the meeting said they had that spiritual awakening, a change in thinking. Well, all of a sudden you start to put what they call a new pair of glasses. And when the whole thing is called humility, it's step 7, getting out of self. When we lose the self, when you think and you're upset, it's about the self. It's about resentment most of the time with people. And it's about the past or the future. And that's why we have prayer and meditation. But I'm going on and on here, but there is a solution to all of this. And it's directly, I never understood this relationship to the food. There is a way out of this mess. There's a way out of this whole situation we have with our addictions, with life in general. And just like to go to it's very basic, the whole situation here. And if you go to the doctor's opinion on page, starting on Roman numeral 27, and he says, in the middle of the page, it says, what with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. So they figured out that all the experts, the doctors and scientists of the day couldn't figure it out. And here we are, how many years later, right? We went to the moon, all these scientific amazing things, the internet, Zoom meetings, whatever, and still they haven't figured out with all the things they've tried, even cutting parts of the stomach out, right? And all the pills and medications. And again, we're here for all 12-step programs and addictions, and I talk about addicted to people too, right? Codependency. But a lot of us are focusing with the food, and there's a way out of this mess. So what's the way out of it? And Dr. Silkworth says what he noticed when Bill, for the 3rd time, came into Townsend Hospital. If you like the video and want to spread the message, press the like and subscribe button. Thank you. And he says on page Roman numeral 31, I knew the man by name and partly recognized his features, but there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. So here we had Bill. Actually, if we go in Bill's story, because this is what the doctor observed, but on page 8 in Bill's story, what he says there is that this is where the position he was in. On page 8, he says, on the first full paragraph, no words can tell the loneliness and despair I found in the bitter morass of self-pity. Notice the word self he uses here a lot. Quicksand stretched all around me in all directions. I met my match. I've been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. So that's what he did. But then the doctor realized what he saw in Bill. He couldn't even recognize him. He's a different man. On page Roman 29, also on that page, he talks about the spiritual awakening on Roman 28, that the phenomenon craved is limited to the class never occurs in the average temperate drinker. And he goes on to say, the ideas must be grounded in the power greater in themselves if they are to recreate their lives. But anyway, it all comes down to this, and this is what I want to say, is that the whole thing is it's a change in thinking, a design for living. In other words, we can't find our way out of this mess, whatever we try to do, because it's our crazy thinking and our addictions that brought us here. So we're taking the mind that is inundated with all of this insanity. Step 2 said we had to be restored to sanity, and trying to figure it out. So that's where the spiritual awakening comes in, when all of a sudden the light switch goes on. I heard someone saying that before the meeting started, that they had a perception change. All of a sudden we see life differently. And I emphasize when Bill talked about the self. The self is the problem. It's what we conceive, and that's our whole conception of life. That reminds me, some people, if you're familiar with 12-step programs and meetings, people said, well, I started the meeting, I was on a pink cloud. And then, they said, well, then if they say, well, it's going to go away. But Bill, in his story, on page 8, actually, where we said, he talks about a pink cloud, but it never goes away. He says here, and towards the middle of the bottom of the page, he says, I was soon to be catapulted in what I'd like to call the 4th dimension of existence. I was to know happiness and peace and usefulness way of life, that it's incredibly more wonderful as time passes. So our joy and happiness when we work these steps doesn't come. The reason people get what they call a pink cloud and feel happy, they come in, they think there's some hope, they meet people and they say, oh, this is the answer. But after the promises, a lot of time I read the 10-step promises, but the paragraph after it has a lot to say what I was talking about. It says, it is easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. We are headed for trouble if we do. For alcohol, we could say food or any addiction is a subtle foe. We're not cured of our addictions. Usually we have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. So during the day, again, the perception change. Don't try to control it or fight it, but think about it differently. Look at that food and realize your body's God's temple. So it's saying here, fit spiritual condition. Have spiritual bread. Think of things of nature. Go out and enjoy that. And realize that's a true source of nourishment, not these foods, or if it's wholesome foods from the ground, or vegetables, or fruit I eat, or grains, and without all that junk, man-made junk on it, right? The synthetic stuff. So it says here, every day is a day when we must carry the vision of God's will into all our activities. So we doing God's will when we put into our body all of this junk? We wouldn't even put bad gas into our car, yet we do it all day long with our body. Again, perception. I look at it now and I see these foods with all of this garbage and junk in them, and I say, wow, that's not for me anymore. It's just changing and looking at it. Like everything is perception in life. It's the way, it's all perception. It's not so much about life, it's how we look at it. And we were inundated and brainwashed continuously by the corporations. So you want to be a slave to their wanting to make a few dollars off of you and their craziness. It's interesting how the discouragement brings us back into the addiction. All we have is today, right now, so and with everything in life, so whatever you experienced or whatever you did yesterday has nothing to do with today. Some people, they'll do that and they'll go out and for 10 years and relapse, but we don't have to do that. We can start, it's called start the day over and not be, it's nothing. It's only what you make it in your mind. Actually, it was a good lesson because what came out of it was you realize the salt was being retained in your body. When we start eating healthier, our body reacts and starts to, like if I was to eat oily foods and I feel it in my stomach, which I never did when I was eating them all day long, or when I eat salt, I feel actually the blood pressure going up because my body is used to eating clean and wholesome and not having that much salt in it. So that was great what you did. So you just move on from there. That's all. You're doing good. 2 weeks and then you had one little misstep. That's when we get back into the addiction. That's what I see as the big fallacy with people when they, very successful people do 9 failures before the 10th time and then they're successful. So if we can take a lesson from that and realize that the step backwards are fine, but we take 2 steps forward. Yeah, everything's so counterintuitive. It's really amazing how everything I learned, the diet books, the experts, nutritionists, and all the diet programs, and there's only one solution. Right now, literature says it. There's a way out of this, but it's called the spiritual perception change, which I needed.